Maria walked into the job interview with her head held high, wearing a crisp white blouse and navy blazer that concealed more than just her professional qualifications. At 28, she had applied for a position as a safety coordinator at one of the city's largest construction companies. The role required someone with real-world experience in hazardous environments, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with keeping workers safe. The interview panel consisted of 3 middle-aged men in expensive suits. They looked at her resume with skeptical expressions, their eyes scanning the impressive list of certifications and emergency response training. The lead interviewer, Mr. Thompson, leaned back in his leather chair and raised an eyebrow. "Miss Rodriguez, your qualifications look good on paper, but this is serious work. We're talking about construction sites with heavy machinery, chemical hazards, and life-threatening situations. Our workers need someone they can trust, someone who's been through real danger." His tone carried a condescending edge that Maria had heard too many times before. Maria maintained her calm demeanor, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I understand the gravity of the position, sir."
Safety isn't just a job for me. It's something I live and breathe every day. The second interviewer, Mr. Davis, shuffled through her papers.
"You're young and, frankly, you look like you've lived a pretty comfortable life. How do we know you can handle the pressure when things go wrong? When someone's life is hanging in the balance?" The third man, Mr. Wilson, nodded in agreement. "We've had candidates with military backgrounds, former firefighters, people who've seen real action. What makes you think you can compete with that kind of experience?" Maria felt the familiar sting of judgment, the same dismissive attitude she'd encountered countless times since she started rebuilding her life. People saw her polished appearance, her carefully maintained composure, and assumed she'd never faced adversity. They couldn't see the strength that had been forged in fire, the resilience that had been tested in ways they couldn't imagine. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your concerns about my ability to handle dangerous situations," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But I believe experience isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the darkest places." Mr. Thompson smirked. "That sounds like something you'd read in a motivational book. We need concrete examples. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's life depended on your decisions? Have you ever had to make split-second choices under extreme pressure?" Maria's mind flashed back to memories she usually kept buried deep. The smell of smoke, the sound of screaming, the weight of another person's survival resting entirely on her shoulders. She could tell them about those moments, but she'd learned that some stories were too heavy for casual conversation, too real for people who'd never walked through hell. "I have," she said simply, "more than once." The interviewers exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. Mr. Davis leaned forward. "Look, Maria, you seem like a nice girl, but nice doesn't cut it in this industry. We need someone with scars, someone who knows what it's like to face real danger, someone who's proven they can survive when everything goes wrong." The word scars hung in the air like a challenge. Maria's fingers unconsciously moved toward her back, where beneath the fabric of her blouse lay a roadmap of survival that these men couldn't begin to imagine. Each mark told a story of endurance, of refusing to give up when death seemed like the easier option. "Scars," she repeated quietly. "You want to know about scars?" Mr. Wilson misread her tone as defeat. "It's nothing personal. We just need someone with proven experience in high-stress, dangerous situations, someone who's been tested." Maria stood up slowly, her decision made. She'd spent years hiding her past, carefully crafting a professional image that wouldn't invite pity or uncomfortable questions. But these men were asking for proof of her ability to survive, to lead others through danger. They wanted evidence of her strength. "You're absolutely right," she said, turning away from the panel. "Experience matters, and scars tell stories that words never could." Her hands moved to the buttons of her blazer, then to her blouse. The men shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, unsure of what was happening. This wasn't how interviews typically went. "Miss Rodriguez, what are you—" Mr. Thompson began, but his words died in his throat as Maria turned back around. Her back was a canvas of survival, marked with scars that spoke of unimaginable trials. Some were thin and precise, others were jagged reminders of desperate escapes. Burns marked places where she'd crawled through fire to save others. Each scar was a badge of honor earned in the darkest moments of human experience. The room fell completely silent. The 3 men who had been so confident in their judgment just moments before now stared in stunned recognition of their own assumptions. They'd wanted proof of experience with danger, evidence of survival under pressure. Maria had just shown them both. "You asked about scars," she said, her voice unwavering. "You wanted to know if I'd been tested. Every mark on my body represents a moment when giving up would have been easier than fighting. Every scar is proof that I chose to survive, and more importantly, that I chose to help others survive too." Mr. Davis swallowed hard, his earlier skepticism crumbling. We had no idea." "That's exactly the point," Maria replied, beginning to button her blouse back up. "You looked at me and saw someone soft, someone untested. You made assumptions based on appearance rather than asking the right questions. In safety coordination, that kind of judgment can get people killed." The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These men, who prided themselves on their ability to assess character and capability, had just been schooled by the very person they'd dismissed. Maria's scars weren't just evidence of what she'd survived, they were proof of her commitment to survival itself. As she finished adjusting her blazer, Maria looked each interviewer in the eye. "Now, shall we discuss how my actual experience qualifies me for this position? Or do you need to see more proof that I understand what it means to face real danger?" The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mr. Thompson, who had been so quick to judge just minutes earlier, cleared his throat and gestured for Maria to sit back down. His entire demeanor had changed, replaced by a mixture of respect and curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Please, Miss Rodriguez," he said softly. "We owe you an apology, and frankly, we'd like to understand better. If you're comfortable sharing, could you tell us about your background?" Maria settled back into her chair, noting how the three men now looked at her with completely different eyes. The condescending attitudes had vanished, replaced by genuine attention. She'd spent years perfecting the art of hiding her past, but today felt different. Today her story might actually serve a purpose beyond just getting a job. "I grew up in a situation that most people wouldn't wish on their worst enemy," she began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the memories. "My father was involved with some very dangerous people. Drug dealers, human traffickers, the kind of criminals who don't hesitate to use violence to protect their interests." Mr. Wilson leaned forward, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "How old were you when this started?" "I was 7 when I first realized our family wasn't normal. Most kids worry about homework and playground bullies. I worried about whether the men who came to our house late at night were going to hurt my mother or my little sister." Maria's hands remained calm in her lap, but her eyes held the depth of someone who had seen too much too young. "My father used our house as a safe house for people being smuggled across the border. Desperate families, women running from abusive situations, children who had been separated from their parents. They would stay for days or weeks hidden in our basement, waiting for the next part of their journey." Mr. Davis shook his head in disbelief. "That must have been terrifying for a child." "It was," Maria acknowledged. "But it also taught me something important about survival. I learned that when people are desperate, when they're facing life or death situations, panic kills more than any external threat. The families who made it to safety were the ones who could stay calm under pressure, who could think clearly even when everything was falling apart." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing with the harder parts of her story. "When I was 12, everything changed. The authorities were closing in on my father's operation, and rival gangs were trying to take over his territory. Our house became a war zone literally overnight." The three interviewers sat in rapt attention, understanding now that they were hearing about experiences that went far beyond anything they had imagined. Maria continued, her voice never wavering despite the intensity of what she was sharing. "One night, armed men broke into our house. They weren't there to negotiate or arrest anyone. They came to eliminate my father and anyone who might be a witness. I was sleeping in my room when I heard the first gunshots downstairs." Mr. Thompson's face had gone pale. "What did you do?" "I did what my father had always taught me to do in an emergency. I got my sister and we went to the safe room he'd built in the walls of our house. But when we got there, we found 8 other people already hiding. 3 families with small children, all terrified and looking to the adults for guidance." Maria's memory transported her back to that cramped, dark space where the smell of fear was almost overwhelming. The adults were panicking. The mothers were crying. The fathers were arguing about whether to surrender or try to fight. Meanwhile, the children were feeding off that fear, becoming more hysterical by the minute. I realized that someone needed to take control, or we were all going to die. Not from the gunmen necessarily, but from our own panic. People were hyperventilating. Babies were crying loud enough to give away our location, and the arguing was getting louder and more desperate. Mr. Wilson asked quietly, "How does a 12-year-old take control in a situation like that?" "You don't think about age when survival is on the line," Maria replied. "I started by focusing on the immediate problems. I got the mothers to help calm the babies by showing them how to muffle the crying without hurting them. I organized the older children to help distribute water and keep the younger ones quiet by telling them stories in whispers. But the real test came when we heard the gunmen searching the house. Getting closer to our hiding spot, one of the fathers wanted to surrender, convinced they would show mercy if we gave up voluntarily. Another wanted to make a run for it, even though we were surrounded. The arguing was getting so loud that we could hear voices outside our wall starting to investigate the noise. The conference room had become completely still, with the three men hanging on every word of Maria's account. She could see in their faces the growing realization of just how wrong their initial assessment had been. I made a decision that probably saved all our lives. I told everyone that we were going to follow my lead. No questions asked, no arguments, no discussion. I was just a kid, but I spoke with such certainty that the adults actually listened. I had noticed during the construction of the safe room that my father had built a secondary exit, a tunnel that led to the neighbor's basement. It was narrow, barely big enough for an adult to crawl through, and it was partially blocked by debris. But it was our only chance. Maria described how she had organized the escape, sending the smallest children first, then helping the adults navigate the tight space while keeping everyone calm and quiet. The hardest part wasn't the physical challenge of getting through that tunnel. It was keeping everyone focused and preventing panic when we could hear the gunmen getting closer. I had to make split-second decisions about who went when, how to handle a pregnant woman who was claustrophobic, how to keep a crying baby quiet while we crawled through pitch-black spaces. Every choice could have meant the difference between life and death for all of us, Mr. Davis asked. "Did everyone make it out?" "Everyone made it to the neighbor's basement," Maria confirmed. But that was just the beginning. We still had to get out of the neighborhood without being seen, find safe transportation, and figure out how to contact people who could help. All while avoiding both the gunmen and the police, who might not have understood the difference between victims and criminals. The weight of her words settled over the room as the three men began to truly understand the depth of experience that sat before them. This wasn't just a young woman with good grades and certifications. This was someone who had been tested in ways that went beyond any training program or simulation. That night taught me everything I know about crisis management, Maria concluded. Real leadership isn't about having authority or experience on paper. It's about staying calm when everyone else is losing their minds, making clear decisions under impossible pressure, and taking responsibility for other people's lives when failure isn't an option. Mr. Thompson set down his pen and looked directly at Maria. "What happened after that night? How did you get from there to here?" Maria took a deep breath, knowing that the next part of her story would be even more difficult to tell. That night was just the beginning. After we escaped, I realized that my old life was over. My father was dead, our house was destroyed, and my mother, sister, and I were now targets ourselves. We had to disappear completely. We ended up in a witness protection program, but not the kind you see in movies. This was more like being abandoned with new identities and no support system. My mother had never worked outside the home. My sister was only 9, and I was trying to finish middle school while dealing with trauma that I didn't even have words for yet. Mr. Wilson leaned forward. "That must have been incredibly isolating." "It was," Maria agreed. "But isolation taught me self-reliance in ways that most people never learn. When you can't trust anyone else to take care of you, you develop skills very quickly. I learned to forge documents, manage money, find safe places to live, and most importantly, how to read people and situations for signs of danger." She paused, remembering the constant hypervigilance that had defined her teenage years. For 3 years, we moved every few months. Sometimes because we'd been discovered, sometimes just because staying in one place too long felt dangerous. I attended 7 different high schools and learned to adapt quickly to new environments. During that time, I also learned about the underground networks that help people in desperate situations, not criminal organizations like my father was involved with, but legitimate groups that help trafficking victims, domestic violence survivors, and refugees. I started volunteering with them when I was 15, Mr. Davis asked. "Wasn't that dangerous, given your situation?" "Everything was dangerous," Maria replied. But I discovered that helping other people in crisis situations was something I was naturally good at. Maybe because I understood what it felt like to have your whole world fall apart in an instant. Maybe because I'd learned how to stay calm when everything was chaos. My first real test came when I was 16. I was volunteering at a safe house for women escaping domestic violence when one of the residents' abusers found the location. He came with 2 other men armed and determined to take his wife back by force. The memory was still vivid in Maria's mind. The social worker on duty froze up completely. She was trained to handle paperwork and counseling sessions, not armed confrontations. There were 8 women and 6 children in the house, and this man was making it clear that he was willing to hurt anyone who got in his way. I ended up coordinating the response. I got the other women to barricade the children in an interior room, while I worked with the target's wife to figure out how to de-escalate the situation. She knew her husband better than anyone and could predict how he would react to different approaches. Mr. Thompson was taking notes now, completely engaged in the story. How did you handle it? I realized that calling the police would likely result in violence before they could arrive. Instead, I used psychological tactics. I had the wife call her abuser and tell him that she would come outside to talk, but only if he sent his friends away first. The goal was to separate him from his backup and reduce the immediate threat level. While she was on the phone with him, I was organizing the other women to create multiple exit strategies in case things went wrong. We identified all possible escape routes, figured out how to get the children out quickly and quietly, and established communication signals so everyone would know what to do without having to speak. Maria described how she had positioned herself where she could observe the confrontation while remaining hidden, ready to coordinate an evacuation if the situation deteriorated. The conversation between the husband and wife was intense. He was trying to use emotional manipulation, threats, and eventually physical intimidation to get her to come with him. But we had prepared for that. The wife had been coached on how to stay calm, how to keep the conversation going without agreeing to anything, and how to signal if she felt like the situation was about to turn violent. Meanwhile, I was watching his body language and behavior patterns, looking for signs that he was about to escalate. The turning point came when he realized that his usual tactics weren't working. He started to get frustrated and angry, which meant we were moving into the danger zone. That's when I made the decision to intervene directly. The 3 interviewers were completely absorbed in Maria's account. Mr. Wilson asked, "What did you do?" I stepped out where he could see me and started talking to him like I was just a neighbor who had wandered over to see what was happening. I pretended to be completely oblivious to the real situation, just making casual conversation about the weather and asking if everything was okay. It sounds simple, but it completely changed the dynamic. Suddenly, he wasn't dealing with just his wife in an isolated confrontation. There was a witness, someone who might call for help, someone who was treating the situation like it was normal instead of threatening. It forced him to reassess his approach. Maria explained how she had gradually inserted herself into the conversation, using techniques she'd learned from watching hostage negotiators and crisis counselors. I kept him talking while subtly moving the interaction away from the house and the other potential victims. The goal was to give him a way to save face while leaving without getting what he came for. The key was understanding that his violence came from feeling powerless and out of control. Instead of challenging that directly, which would have made him more dangerous, I gave him opportunities to feel like he was making choices and maintaining his dignity. It took almost an hour, but eventually he got back in his car and left. No one was hurt, no property was damaged, and the woman he was trying to force back into an abusive relationship remained safe. More importantly, we had demonstrated to all the other women in the house that they could protect themselves and each other. Mr. Davis shook his head in amazement. That's incredible problem solving under pressure. But how did experiences like that prepare you for construction site safety? Construction sites are just another type of high-risk environment, Maria answered. The specific dangers might be different. Heavy machinery instead of armed men, chemical hazards instead of psychological manipulation. But the principles of safety management are exactly the same. You have to be able to assess risks quickly and accurately. You need to stay calm when things go wrong. You have to be able to communicate clearly with people who are scared or stressed. Most importantly, you have to be able to make decisions that other people's lives depend on, often with incomplete information and no time for second guessing. Every workplace accident I've studied could have been prevented by better situational awareness, clearer communication, or faster decision-making under pressure. Those are exactly the skills I developed during the years when my own survival and the survival of others depended on getting those things right. The room fell quiet as the three men absorbed what they had heard. Their candidate wasn't just qualified for the position. She was uniquely prepared for it in ways that no training program could have provided. Her scars weren't just evidence of survival. They were proof of a kind of competence that only comes from real-world testing, under the most extreme conditions. Mr. Thompson looked down at his notes, then back up at Maria with newfound respect. I have to ask, with all you've been through, what made you choose safety coordination specifically? You could have gone into law enforcement, social work, emergency services. Why construction? Maria smiled for the first time since the interview began. Actually, construction chose me. When I was 18, I was living in a transitional housing program for young adults who had aged out of various protection systems. I needed work, and the only job I could find was as a general laborer on a construction site. I thought it would be temporary, just something to pay the bills while I figured out my next move. But on my third day, I witnessed an accident that changed everything. She paused, her expression becoming serious again. A crane operator was moving a load of steel beams when one of the cables snapped. The beams were falling directly toward a group of workers who were too focused on their tasks to notice the danger. The site supervisor was shouting warnings, but the noise from other machinery was drowning him out. The workers couldn't hear him, and he was too far away to physically reach them. I was closer, and I could see exactly what was about to happen. Mr. Wilson leaned forward. What did you do? I did what I'd learned to do in crisis situations. I acted without hesitation. I grabbed a nearby air horn and started blasting it while running toward the workers. Then I physically tackled the closest one and started pulling the others out of the way. We all made it clear just as the beams crashed down exactly where they had been standing. Afterward, the site supervisor asked me how I had reacted so quickly. He said most people would have frozen up or panicked. When I explained that I'd been in dangerous situations before, he offered to sponsor me for safety training if I was interested in staying in construction. Maria described how that supervisor, an older man named Frank, had become her mentor in the construction industry. Frank had been in construction for 30 years, and he'd seen too many preventable accidents. He taught me that construction safety isn't just about following rules and wearing hard hats. It's about creating a culture where people look out for each other. Under Frank's guidance, I learned that every construction site is essentially a community of people facing shared risks. The same skills I'd used to keep people calm in life-threatening situations translated perfectly to preventing workplace accidents. Reading people, anticipating problems, communicating clearly under pressure, these were exactly the tools needed for effective safety coordination. I started taking every safety course I could find. OSHA certifications, hazardous materials training, emergency response protocols, accident investigation techniques, but more importantly, I started studying the psychology of workplace safety. Why do people take unnecessary risks? How do you change behaviors that could get someone killed? Mr. Davis asked. Did you find that your background gave you advantages in safety work? Absolutely, Maria replied. Most safety coordinators come from academic backgrounds or previous construction experience. They understand the technical aspects perfectly, but they sometimes struggle with the human element. They know what the regulations say, but they don't always know how to get people to actually follow them. My background taught me that people don't usually ignore safety protocols because they're careless or stupid. They do it because they're under pressure, because they're distracted by personal problems, because they're trying to prove something, or because they've become complacent after years without accidents. I learned to spot the warning signs. The worker who's going through a divorce and isn't paying full attention. The new guy who's afraid to ask questions because he doesn't want to look incompetent. The veteran who's gotten cocky after years of experience and thinks the rules don't apply to him. Maria explained how she had developed a unique approach to safety coordination that combined strict technical standards with deep understanding of human psychology. I don't just inspect equipment and review procedures. I watch how people interact with each other, how they respond to stress, how they communicate when things go wrong. For example, I once prevented a major accident by noticing that a normally talkative crane operator had become very quiet over the course of a week. When I talked to him privately, I discovered that his teenage son had been arrested for drug possession. He was so distracted by worry that he was making small errors in judgment that could have eventually led to a serious accident. Instead of just telling him to focus on his job, I helped him connect with resources to deal with his family situation. I also temporarily assigned him to ground duties until he could get his head clear. It wasn't in any safety manual, but it was the right thing to do for everyone involved. Mr. Thompson was taking detailed notes. That's a very sophisticated approach to safety management. How do you balance that kind of personal attention with the demands of a large construction site? You build systems, Maria answered. I train crew leaders to recognize the same warning signs I look for. I create opportunities for workers to report concerns, not just about equipment or procedures, but about anything that might affect safety. Anonymous suggestion boxes, regular check-ins, open-door policies. Most importantly, I work to create an environment where asking for help is seen as a strength, not a weakness. In my experience, accidents happen when people are struggling with something, whether it's a technical problem they don't understand or a personal issue that's affecting their concentration, but they're afraid to speak up. I also learned to recognize that different types of workers respond to different approaches. The younger guys often need mentorship and confidence building. The older workers sometimes need to be reminded that new safety technologies and procedures are improvements, not criticisms of how they used to do things. Maria described a particularly challenging situation she had handled at her previous job. We had a team of workers from different cultural backgrounds, and there were communication problems that were creating safety risks. Some of the workers were afraid to report hazards because they were worried about their immigration status. Others were reluctant to follow safety protocols that differed from what they were used to in their home countries. I spent time learning about their backgrounds and concerns. I brought in translators for safety meetings. I worked with management to clarify that safety reporting would never be used against anyone's employment status. Most importantly, I made sure that safety training acknowledged and respected their experience while still meeting our standards. The result was not just better safety compliance, but better teamwork overall. When people feel respected and understood, they're more likely to look out for each other. Safety becomes a shared responsibility instead of something imposed from above. Mr. Wilson looked impressed. It sounds like you've developed a comprehensive philosophy of safety management. I learned it the hard way, Maria replied. When you've been in situations where people's lives literally depend on everyone working together and following protocols, you understand that safety isn't just about rules and equipment. It's about creating conditions where people can do their best work without putting themselves or others at risk. Every scar on my back represents a time when someone's safety protocols failed. Not just physical safety, but the systems that are supposed to protect people from dangerous situations. I got into construction safety because I want to make sure that other people don't have to go through what I went through. The three interviewers exchanged glances, and Maria could see that they were beginning to understand not just her qualifications, but her deep personal commitment to the work they were hiring for. Mr. Davis cleared his throat and set down his pen. Maria, I have to say everything you've shared has been remarkable. But I'm curious about something else. How do you handle the emotional weight of all this responsibility, knowing that people's lives depend on the decisions you make? Maria considered the question carefully before answering. That's probably the most important question you could ask. The truth is, the emotional weight never goes away completely, but I've learned that the fear of that responsibility is actually what makes you good at the job. When I was younger, in those crisis situations, I didn't have time to think about the emotional impact. I just reacted. But as I got older and started working in safety coordination professionally, I had to develop healthier ways to process the stress and responsibility. The key is understanding that the emotional weight serves a purpose. It keeps you sharp, keeps you from getting complacent. The day you stop feeling the weight of that responsibility is the day you become dangerous to the people depending on you. She described how she had learned to channel that emotional intensity into meticulous preparation and continuous improvement. I spend hours reviewing every safety protocol, studying accident reports from other sites, researching new technologies and techniques. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I know that preparation is the best way to honor the trust people place in me. I also learned that you can't carry that weight alone. I build teams of people who share the responsibility, Safety coordinators who think they have to handle everything themselves eventually burn out or make mistakes. The best safety programs are collaborative efforts where everyone feels ownership. Mr. Thompson asked, "Have you ever had to deal with a serious accident despite your precautions?" Maria's expression grew solemn. "Yes. 3 years ago, at a high-rise construction project, we had a fatality. A worker fell through an unguarded opening that should have been covered. It was a violation of multiple safety protocols, and it happened because several people made small errors that combined into a tragic result. That day tested everything I thought I knew about safety management. I had to coordinate the emergency response, work with investigators, support the victim's family, and help the other workers process what had happened, all while dealing with my own feelings of responsibility and failure. The investigation showed that I had followed all proper procedures, that the accident resulted from a series of individual choices that I couldn't have prevented. But knowing that intellectually doesn't make it easier emotionally. Someone died on a site where I was responsible for safety." Maria paused, collecting herself before continuing. "That experience taught me something crucial about this work. You can do everything right and still have tragedies occur, but that doesn't mean you give up or become less careful. It means you learn from every incident and find ways to do better." I spent months analyzing what happened, not just the technical failures, but the human factors that contributed to the accident. Why did multiple people ignore safety protocols? What conditions led to those choices? How could our safety culture be improved to prevent similar incidents? The result was a complete overhaul of how we approached safety training and enforcement. Instead of just teaching rules, we started teaching people to think critically about risk assessment. Instead of just punishing violations, we started addressing the underlying factors that led to risky behaviors. Mr. Wilson leaned forward. "How did the other workers react to the changes?" "Initially, there was resistance. Some people thought we were overreacting, making their jobs harder without really improving safety. But I had learned something important from my earlier experiences with crisis management. You have to help people understand why changes are necessary, not just what changes you're implementing." I started sharing more of my own background with the workers. Not the details of my childhood trauma, but the lessons I'd learned about how quickly situations can turn dangerous, how small mistakes can have huge consequences, and how everyone's safety depends on everyone else following protocols. I also made sure that safety improvements came with explanations of the reasoning behind them. Instead of just saying, "Wear your harness," I would explain exactly how falls happen, what the injury statistics look like, and how proper equipment used could save their lives or prevent them from becoming paralyzed. Maria described how she had worked to transform the safety culture from one of compliance to one of understanding. People follow rules better when they understand the purpose behind them. More importantly, they start thinking proactively about safety instead of just reactively following procedures. I began holding regular safety meetings where workers could share their own observations about potential hazards. I created systems for reporting near misses without fear of punishment. I made sure that safety concerns raised by workers were addressed quickly and visibly, so people could see that their input was valued. The transformation took time, but the results were dramatic. Not just in accident reduction, but in overall job satisfaction and productivity. When people feel safe at work, they can focus on doing their jobs well instead of constantly worrying about getting hurt. Mr. Davis asked, "What's your approach when you encounter workers who are resistant to safety protocols?" "I've learned that resistance usually comes from one of 3 places," Maria replied. "Fear, misunderstanding, or past negative experiences with safety enforcement. The key is figuring out which one you're dealing with and addressing the root cause. Fear-based resistance often comes from workers who are afraid that following safety protocols will make them look slow or incompetent. They think that taking time for safety measures will hurt their productivity or job security. With these workers, I focus on demonstrating that safe work is actually more efficient in the long run. Misunderstanding-based resistance comes from people who don't really understand why certain protocols exist or how to implement them properly. These workers benefit from additional training and mentoring. I pair them with experienced workers who can show them how to work safely and efficiently. Past negative experience resistance is the trickiest. These are workers who have been in situations where safety enforcement was used punitively, where reporting problems got people in trouble instead of solving issues. Building trust with these workers takes time and consistent demonstration that the safety program is there to protect them, not punish them. In all cases, I try to approach resistance with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of immediately assuming that someone is being careless or defiant, I ask questions. What's making it difficult to follow this protocol? What concerns do you have about this procedure? Have you seen problems with this approach before? Maria explained how her background had taught her to look beyond surface behaviors to understand underlying motivations. People who have survived dangerous situations, like I have, develop very good instincts about risk assessment. Sometimes when workers resist safety protocols, it's because they're picking up on problems that haven't been formally identified yet. I've learned to take worker concerns seriously, even when they can't articulate exactly what's bothering them. Experienced construction workers develop a sense for when something feels wrong, and that intuition is often based on subtle cues that formal safety inspections might miss. The key is creating an environment where people feel comfortable sharing their concerns and where those concerns are investigated thoroughly. Some of my best safety improvements have come from workers who noticed problems that weren't obvious. From a purely technical perspective, the 3 interviewers were clearly impressed by Maria's comprehensive understanding of both the technical and human aspects of safety management. Her approach went far beyond checking boxes and enforcing regulations. It was about creating a culture where safety was everyone's responsibility and everyone's priority. Mr. Thompson closed his notebook and looked directly at Maria. I think I speak for all of us when I say this has been the most remarkable interview any of us has ever conducted. But I have one final question. Given everything you've been through, everything you've accomplished, what do you hope to achieve here if we offer you this position? Maria straightened in her chair, her voice taking on a tone of quiet determination. I want to build something that lasts. Every job I've taken, every safety program I've implemented, has been preparation for an opportunity like this one. Your company has the size and influence to create safety standards that could transform the entire industry. Most safety coordination focuses on preventing accidents after they happen, investigating incidents, updating protocols, punishing violations. I want to create systems that prevent accidents from happening in the first place by addressing the human factors that lead to dangerous situations. She outlined her vision for a comprehensive safety program that would go beyond traditional approaches. I want to establish peer mentorship programs where experienced workers help newer employees develop safe work habits. I want to create stress management resources so that personal problems don't become workplace hazards. I want to implement communication training so that people from different backgrounds can work together safely and effectively. Most importantly, I want to develop a safety culture where asking for help is rewarded, where reporting potential problems is seen as leadership, and where everyone understands that their safety and the safety of their coworkers is the most important part of their job. Mr. Wilson asked, how would you measure the success of such a program? Obviously, accident reduction would be the primary metric, Maria replied. But I'd also track leading indicators like near-miss reporting rates, safety suggestion implementation, training completion and retention, and worker satisfaction surveys that include questions about safety culture. I'd want to see increased communication between workers and management about safety concerns. I'd measure how quickly safety issues are identified and resolved. I'd track whether workers feel comfortable speaking up when they see problems, and whether they feel supported when they need additional training or resources. Beyond the numbers, I'd want to see fundamental changes in how people think about safety. Instead of viewing safety protocols as obstacles to productivity, I want workers to see them as tools that enable them to do their best work while protecting themselves and their colleagues. Maria described her long-term vision for the company's safety program. Within 2 years, I'd want our safety record to be so strong that other companies in the industry start asking how we achieve our results. I'd want us to become a model for how construction safety should be done. But more than that, I want to help change how the entire industry thinks about safety. Right now, many companies see safety compliance as a necessary cost of doing business. I want to demonstrate that excellent safety practices actually improve productivity, worker retention, and overall job quality. Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair. That's an ambitious vision. What makes you confident you can achieve it? Because I've seen what's possible when people work together under pressure, Maria answered. In the worst situations I've experienced, I've watched ordinary people do extraordinary things to protect each other. Construction workers already have that same instinct to look out for their teammates. My job is to channel that instinct into systematic safety practices. I've also learned that sustainable change happens when people understand not just what they're supposed to do, but why it matters. Every safety protocol I would implement would come with clear explanations of the reasoning behind it and real examples of how it protects people. Most importantly, I've learned that credibility in safety management comes from demonstrating that you understand the risks people face and that you're committed to their well-being, not just regulatory compliance. Maria stood up and moved toward the window, looking out at the construction site visible from the conference room. I see workers down there who go home to families every night. They have children who depend on them, spouses who worry about them, dreams and goals that require them to stay healthy and safe. Every decision I make as safety coordinator affects whether those people make it home safely. That's not just a professional responsibility, it's a moral obligation, and it's one I'm prepared to fulfill with everything I've learned from surviving situations where that kind of responsibility was literally a matter of life and death. She turned back to face the three interviewers. The scars on my back represent times when safety systems failed, when people who should have been protected weren't. I can't change what happened to me, but I can use what I learned to make sure other people don't go through similar experiences. This isn't just a job for me, it's a calling, and I'm ready to bring every skill I've developed, every lesson I've learned, every ounce of determination I've built to this role. The room fell silent as the three men processed everything they had heard. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke. Maria, when you walked in here today, we thought we were interviewing a young woman with good credentials but limited real-world experience. We were wrong about everything except the good credentials. We've interviewed dozens of candidates for this position. Some had impressive resumes. Others had years of experience in construction or military backgrounds, but none of them demonstrated the depth of understanding about safety, leadership, and human psychology that you've shown today. Mr. Wilson nodded in agreement. Your background has given you insights that can't be taught in any training program. The combination of your technical qualifications and your unique personal experience makes you exactly what we've been looking for. Mr. Davis added, more than that, your vision for what safety coordination could become aligns perfectly with where we want to take our company. We don't just want to meet regulatory requirements, we want to set new standards for the industry. Mr. Thompson stood up and extended his hand to Maria. We'd like to offer you the position, with a starting salary that reflects both your qualifications and the value we believe you'll bring to our organization. When can you start? Maria shook his hand with a firm grip, a smile spreading across her face for the first time since the interview began. I can start as soon as you need me. This is the opportunity I've been preparing for my entire life. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scars on her back would always be reminders of the price she had paid for survival. But today they had also become proof of her qualifications for protecting others. She had questioned whether revealing her past was the right choice, whether showing her scars would help or hurt her chances. But now she understood that her experiences weren't something to hide or overcome. They were her greatest qualification for the work she was meant to do. Walking out of that conference room, Maria carried with her not just a new job, but validation that survival could be transformed into service, that trauma could become strength, and that the worst experiences of life could become the foundation for preventing others from facing similar dangers. Her back bore the price of survival, but her future held the promise of using that hard-won knowledge to keep others safe. The questioning was over. The real work was about to begin.